moment. Okay, thank you so much for joining our member seminar series. Today we're having a presentation on the impact of physical infrastructure on nutritious diets, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality, a theory of change. Just quickly as I begin, some meeting protocols. Please do stay muted when you are not speaking. Please also leave your camera off unless you're one of the presenters, and then I leave it to your discretion. But for participants, please leave your camera off just in consideration to potential connectivity issues for others on the call. Please use the chat feature for any comments or questions throughout the presentation. There's also going to be a designated time for Q&A and discussion near the end of the event. Lastly, this event is being recorded and the recording and supporting materials will be made available after the event. We just want to welcome you. I welcome you on behalf of myself from the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk and Resilience, and my colleague Anne-Sophie from the International Center for Evaluation and Development. We're so glad you could join us today. We'll be here. Feel free to message us with any technical issues. We'll also be helping to facilitate the call. So for now, please join us in welcoming our presenters, Charles and Joseph. I'll allow you to go ahead and launch into your presentation, and please do introduce yourselves to our attendees. Thank you.
Hello, Tara. Can we share the presentation?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Is it okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect, okay. So can we start or we wait for some few minutes?
No, you can go ahead and begin now.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to have you here as we share with you one of the studies that we have been undertaking in over 1.5 years concerning the linkages between or the effect of physical infrastructure on nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. So today's presentation, we are looking at one component of what we have been doing, which we have developed a series of theories of change that tries to look at these linkages. Together with me is Joseph Clottey and the other research team members that are here that will be sharing some of these results with you. So I'll make the presentation after that. We look very much forward to the discussing session where we can address most of the comments and suggestions that you have. So this is the order of our presentation. We will start with the background, where we present some quick overview on the essence of infrastructure and its linkages to nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. Then explain to you the methodology that we use in developing the evidence-based theory of change, the components of the theory of change, the underlying assumptions. Then look at the overall framework that shows the impact of the various types of infrastructure on the outcomes of interest. Then we also give some overview on some of the pathways, particularly the different types of infrastructure and its linkages to the outcomes of interest, draw a quick conclusion, and then present few acknowledgements. Just as most of us are aware, or let me say all of us are aware, infrastructure is very important, particularly in terms of addressing development issues. And as it has been shown, infrastructure plays a critical role in terms of attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's not surprising that various governmental and development institutions have implemented several infrastructure interventions at different levels. And if you come to Ethiopia, for instance, what comes to mind in recent times is the GED, the massive dam that has been constructed with the aim of improving access to electricity and irrigation, which aims also to boost the economic development of Ethiopia. In Ghana too, we have also undertaken similar dams. One that comes to mind quickly is the Bui Dam that was commissioned somewhere around 2010, 2011. And we have also undertaken the Millennium Challenge account. Through it, we constructed roads that try to link some of the rural areas to the urban areas, particularly to facilitate the export of horticultural crops. So we have also seen that several researchers and practitioners have looked at this topic, particularly the important role that infrastructure plays in terms of improving nutritious diets, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. However, not all studies seem to look at this important linkage, particularly the gender aspect, because some of the studies have looked at infrastructure to be more or less gender neutral. And therefore, this study that we are looking at wants to see how we can connect the physical infrastructure to gender outcomes and then nutritious diets. And in this case, our interest is not on anthropometrics, but particularly on access and availability of nutritious diet. And one of the major challenges that we have also found in the literature is that studies that fails to account for the gender dimensions and nutritious component of infrastructure may be due to limited access to a framework or a theory of change that seems to guide this type of linkage. And that is the key area that this project we are seeking to contribute in terms of the literature and also relevance for practice. So in this study, basically, we aim to develop an evidence-based theory of change that examines the mechanisms through which physical infrastructure impacts nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. And specifically, we seek to achieve two main things. The first is to identify and explain the pathways that connects physical infrastructure to the outcomes of interest. And lastly, we want to describe the underlying assumptions by which physical infrastructure leads to its impact on nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. Now, we introduce a key terminology here where we say it's about evidence-based, because as we see, previous studies that exist on theory of change are most of the time hypothetical in nature and is not based on the evidence. So what we are trying to contribute is to look at the existing literature and see how we can use the literature, the evidence that exists on this topic to connect these pathways and then the mechanisms. So in terms of methodology, what we did was to first identify the evidence base. So we conducted a systematic search and screening and reviewed so many published materials dating from 2000 to 2022 from various academic and then gray literature sources. And in total, we were able to identify over 54,237 studies. And out of that, after completing the screening exercises, we were able to identify about 342 studies that we have captured it in one of a previous study that we presented in one of the seminar series as the evidence and gap map. So we use this evidence that exists, try to look at the linkage between the infrastructure and the women's economic empowerment. Therefore, in our study, it's not only about hypothesizing, but what we are trying to do is to show where the body of evidence exists, and then those studies that have limited evidence, we try to connect, hypothesize the potential linkages based on our readings of the literature. So what we did was, our team is a very big team, and based on the size of our team of about 10 researchers, we grouped ourselves into 2 members, and each team was tasked to develop one component of the theory of change. Then after we completed that task, the whole team came together to validate and then also reintegrate the various components that we are able to use to generate the overall theory of change. Therefore, each team was tasked to develop an individual theory of change framework, but we met as a team to validate each of them. And at the various stages too, we have other experts that we have been working with since the inception of the project to also look at the various components that we have addressed, and they have provided us feedback. And we also wish that today's presentation, we will receive additional feedback that we will use to further improve on this. So we start by looking at what constitutes physical infrastructure within this framework. Of course, infrastructure has so many definitions, or it means so many things to different people. But in this case, we look at all basic structures that are needed for society or for an enterprise. That is the functioning of a society or an enterprise. And based on this definition, we came out with about 4 different typologies. So the first one that we look at is the production infrastructure. And here we define production infrastructure as those that support agricultural production in order to boost yields, that is agricultural productivity. And here we have subcategories such as irrigation systems, water wells, greenhouse gas, and on-farm energy and power supply. Then we have our post-production infrastructure, and here our key interests were those that are related to storage, processing, and marketing, so that it helps in the supply of healthy foods in safe environments. So under this, the various types of infrastructure that we're interested in were those that were related to storage, processing, marketplaces, and off-farm energy and power supply. Then we look at the distribution networks, particularly those that support agricultural, the delivery of agricultural inputs, and also marketing of agricultural output. So here we look at roads, railways, and bridges. And the last component of the infrastructure that we look at was the information infrastructure, which supports dissemination of good agricultural practices, nutritional knowledge, among others. And here our focus were on information centers, radio stations, telephone masts. So in this study context, our interest lies in the physical infrastructure, but not on usage or access to them, but we are much focused on the existence of this infrastructure. Of course, the usage also plays a key role, but of course, usage also have so many factors that may influence that. So the key issue that we wanted to look at is how the existence of these physical infrastructures support the gender outcomes and the nutritious diet outcomes. Under the various outcomes, for instance, we look at the nutritious diet, and we have so many subcomponents and its indicators. So for instance, we look at the availability and accessibility component of the food security. And here we talk about farm at the different levels, including farm level and then the market level. And then food accessibility, for instance, we look at physical ones, those which we use indicators such as the presence of food market, proximity, and physical presence of food and food vendors. Then we also talk about diet quality, for instance, where we use the individual dietary diversity score, among other major indicators. Then when it comes to the women economic empowerment component, our interests were largely in terms of the 5 DEs, particularly after those that are related to the real indicators, that is women empowerment in agriculture index indicators. And here we look at time allocation, income, leadership, gender parity index, among others. And the potential indicators, as stated, for instance, in terms of agricultural production, includes input in agricultural decisions, autonomy. Then when we talk about access and control over productive resources, we look at ownership of assets, purchase and sale and transfer of assets, among others. Then our last component that we look at was the gender equality, and we have so many subdomains, including economic opportunities and outcomes, where we look at women and men having equal opportunities in terms of agricultural production and value chain and markets, among others. Then we also look at, for instance, reduce exposure to risk, that is gender-based violence, among others. So these were the major indicators that we extracted from literature, and that guided us in trying to look at the linkages between physical infrastructure, women's economic empowerment, gender equality, and nutritious diet. As we are also aware, developing TOCs, we need to explain the underlying assumptions, which plays critical role to show the pathways to which the physical infrastructure leads to the outcomes of interest. And for instance, we have the cause-effect assumptions, and that describes how the pathway to impact and set out the chain of cause and effect relations. So for instance, under this assumption, we have availability of funds from donor agencies and governments to finance infrastructural projects. And not only that, but for instance, we expect that there should be some formative evaluation that assess these type of infrastructures and how it could connect to the various outcomes of interest. And our interest, again, was that the target population, which is low-income consumers, including women and girls, will be using this infrastructure, among other assumptions that we have under the cause-effect assumptions. Then we have another assumption that look at the causal link. And here is the assumptions that need to bring about the expected change. So for instance, if you have communication infrastructure, we expect that you have assets like the radios, the mobile phones, etc., to assess the existing infrastructure. Similarly to that of the transport and food loss reduction pathway, we expect that there are active participation of women and low-income households in the markets. And for instance, the production infrastructure, we expect that there is education and access to these inputs in order for it to lead to the increase in the yield or agricultural productivity that will now have a major impact on the ultimate outcome, which is the nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. So let me start to talk about the overall framework. So in this overall framework, we have the various inputs, which is government and donor institutions providing the funding and other resources that leads to the establishment of these four major infrastructures, whether it's production infrastructure, post-production, distribution, or information. Then if you take, for instance, the production infrastructure, what it can lead to, for instance, is that if you look at irrigation, for instance, it could lead to multiple crop production cycles, because one major challenge that we see in the agricultural sector of many developing countries, including those in the sub-Saharan Africa, is that we are mainly dependent on the rain, that is the use of rain-fed agriculture, and therefore disturbances or variability in the rainfall patterns have severe consequences on the agricultural production decisions, leading to low food productivity. So we expect that if there is availability of irrigation, we increase the number of times crops are produced, then that leads to higher food productivity, making available food sources that households can consume and also sell some. That leads to the impact on the nutritious diet. Similarly, we can also say that for post-production infrastructure, access to market leads to availability of different foods, and therefore people are able to have access to food, and farmers are able to sell their food, reducing post-harvest losses, for instance, that can lead to increase in farm income, leading to food availability and nutritious diet. Alternatively, we can also see the link between information infrastructure, for instance, through the various communication channels, whether providing farmers with information on healthy foods that will have implications on women empowerment, particularly in terms of access to information on healthy diets, and also having a major impact on gender equality, for instance. Now, I will look at briefly the various channels, and for instance, the production pathways. One of them is we need the inputs, and the various inputs are the government and donor support in terms of the construction of this infrastructure, which leads to the various outcomes. That is the different types or components of infrastructure that exist for production. For instance, irrigation or greenhouse gases, among greenhouses, and then having the impact on the cropping patterns, leading to food production, and then increasing farmers' income, for instance, and then the nutritious diet. Of course, on-farm energy sources can also have a major impact in terms of access to energy for production and food processing, leading to higher quality diets, and also having implications on women's economic empowerment and gender equality. Of course, there are other assumptions that have to hold in terms at the various levels, that is the input and output levels. So for instance, at the input levels, there should be availability of funds that are used in terms of constructing these facilities. And not only that, it should also be education on the existence of this infrastructure so that when farmers are able to have access to them, it could lead to these long-term outcomes as expanded. Now, we also see that we use various literature sources to show these linkages, and the various literature sources have been used to buttress the points that connect the various linkages. For instance, linking the outputs to the short-term outcomes, the intermediate outcomes, and then the long-term outcomes. When we look at the food loss reduction pathway, the key thing that we want to show is that, yes, the same inputs should be available in terms of funds and human resources. And not only that, that should also lead to the outcome, the outputs, such as markets should be available, processing facilities, storage facilities, among others. And one key area that can help is the availability of food, and then markets for inputs, reduction in food waste, for instance, and that will lead to higher food availability and farm income, leading to food consumption and nutritious diet. Similarly, with, for instance, storage, we expect that if storage facilities are available, the literature is supporting that it helps to reduce post-harvest losses. That leads to higher food safety, and then increase in the retail and out-tail markets. That has implications on women's participation in the labor market, having major effect on women's economic empowerment and gender equality. Similar linkages are also shown on the communication pathway, as I earlier indicated. For instance, if there are information centers, then by propagating information or spreading information on nutritious foods, then households, including women, are able to access this information that influences the choices of food, and then that has a major implication on nutritious diet. Same approach also helps in terms of the gender outcomes, as having access to nutritious diet. Women play a major role in terms of the decision-making in the selection of foods, particularly in most developing countries. And that are quite important in improving gender outcomes in terms of women's economic empowerment and gender equality. Then on the distribution pathways, if there are roles are key in terms of access to markets and also reduction in food prices because it reduces the travel time, which also have a major implications on food productivity, its availability, and nutritious diet. Certainly, also availability of roads, for instance, leads to reduction in post-harvest losses, and therefore farmers have more of their outputs for sale, and therefore it can also lead to food affordability and accessibility, which are quite important in ensuring nutritious diet and also the gender outcomes. Similar explanations hold for railway line, bridges, among others. And these are really supported by literature, as I said earlier, so that we are able to provide a theory of change that connects the various pathways, not only by hypothesizing, by looking at where the evidence exists, so that we are able to generate the evidence-based theory of change. So what are our major conclusions? First, this study has generated the evidence-based theory of change, and we have been able to look at the mechanisms through which infrastructure impacts nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. Under this study, we have looked at 4 main infrastructures: production, post-production, communication, and transport. And our readings have shown that whilst evidence abound most of the time in terms of the production infrastructure, limited evidence exists on the communication and information aspect. And these are very relevant in terms of practice, because our theory of change that we have been able to do or have been able to develop should guide future research and practitioners in terms of commissioning other studies to look at these linkages. For physical infrastructure, we have shown that, yes, the impacts have not only long-term, but we also have been able to identify some of the short-term and intermediate outcomes. And we have, again, provided several indicators that are quite important for future research and practice as to how we can use the various indicators, as we have shown by our review of the literature, on the pathways or the indicators that can be used to measure these outcomes of interest, particularly those that are related to nutritious diet, gender equality, and women's economic empowerment. And some of these have been measured at the farm level, market level, and we have included those that are related to food availability, food storage, among others. And these, we believe, are very crucial in supporting future studies on commissioning infrastructure in low-income countries, particularly those that are in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So we end with a few acknowledgements, and this study has been led by Dr. David Safwa-Meyao, who have been our principal investigator. We have received considerable support also from Professor Techua Menu, Joseph Clottey, Gloria, Obin, Amwakon, Clarice, Sheila, and Solomon have all played critical roles in designing this evidence-based theory of change. Of course, it's received the generous funding from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look very much forward to the interesting discussions that will follow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Charles, before we hand it over to the moderators, I want to just add this thing that what do we call this theory of change evidence-based? And one of the things, the critical element, if you look at almost every evidence-based theory of change, you don't see the linkages being supported by evidence that have been generated by research. You know, so here, Charles, if you can put the main one on for me, the overall. Okay. So you see that every linkages we have done is supported by a research evidence. We don't assume, you know, normally when we are doing a TOC, it's a hypothesis. It's you sitting down there and say, these are the causal linkages. But we call this one an evidence-based TOC because every connection is supported by a published research evidence. So if we say that this output leads to this outcome or short outcome, you can read the literature to see that there is a causal linkages, an association, there's a positive linkages or a negative linkages. You can see it. So that is why we are showcasing these things, that it's not just a theoretical exercise or a hypothesis, but this is a more research. And as Charles said, by reviewing about 52,000 literature, by coming to about 348 literature that showed the connection, we were able to put it on. And that is what we are promoting, that when we are talking about theory of change, it's not what I think that, infrastructure will lead to this thing, but you need to support it by evidence. And that is why we gave the name, this one, as an evidence-based. And please, next time, Charles, let us make the evidence and base capital so that they know that we are emphasizing it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Dr. Yaw. Charles, I don't know if you have any comments at this point before we go to the
Oh yeah, I
questions.
think I perfectly agree with Dr. Yaw's point, and I think yes, we have to highlight that component. So we look very much forward to the other discussions and on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation today. We have some comments. Thank you all who are joining us from Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia. We are glad to have you all. Just quickly to the comments and the questions. So we have the first one from John Olwande, and he's asking, has the study team considered food safety as a sub-outcome under nutritious diet? The adequacy of post-production infrastructure, especially physical market infrastructure, has important bearing on the safety of food handled at the market. Charles, or anyone from the team?
Yes. So I thought probably we take the series of questions and then go about.
Okay, that's fine.
So, but
And
I can respond. I can respond to this one earlier. So this one, so that subsequently we take all of it. Yes. So yes, it's perfect. We considered food safety indicators, particularly those indicators that are related also to the sensory nature of food in terms of its safety levels. Those indicators have been captured. Where we don't focus more is on the anthropometrics, which was not the focus of this study. But those related to safety and quality, yes, we have addressed as part of the outcome measures. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just take a couple of more questions. The next one is from Linga. I hope I said it correctly. It seems that you conducted a systematic review of existing primary studies. You based your theory of change development on a fairly large number of studies, 342. Could you please mention the protocols you followed in searching and selecting these studies? It would be great if we could use some characteristics of the 342 studies. Thank you. And then the other question is from Francis Osei, and he asks, thank you for the presentation. May I know the research design and research methodology used? And another good question again from Linga, how the indicators you developed in the women empowerment and gender equality indicators differ from the pro-WEAI developed by IFPRI. And then the last one is, please make it very clear what the inclusion and exclusion criteria are. And that is from Paul Kevin. So I hope you managed to have them all. Over to you, Charles. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions, very interesting questions. The line breaks a little bit, so I was able to pick about 3 of them. Let me quickly go through those ones. And I think my other
Sorry, we're losing you, Charles.
Okay. Gloria, can you come in? And I think Charles is not coming through. But Gloria, can you come in and talk about
to generate the evidence and gap map?
Okay.
Also,
Thank
we
you.
have looked
Sorry,
at the
Charles.
concept of, yeah.
We had lost you. We had lost you there. Could you just take us from the top, the question you're on now? You
Okay,
are on
so
now.
can you
We
hear
had
me
lost
now?
you. Yes, we can hear you now.
It's better now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The network was breaking a little bit. So I
No
said,
problem.
what we did was we developed an evidence and gap map. And the evidence and gap map is a synthesis of the evidence, pointing towards the direction of the evidence. So based on that studies that we did, which I showed, which follows the Prisma approach that we have been able to use to streamline the selection processes, to which ended with the 342. So we then took these 342 studies, which have been documented in the evidence and gap map, to now connect these linkages and then be able to make some firm conclusions as to where the direction of the evidence are. And those that we couldn't find the evidence, we have also highlighted that that is the area that needs additional work. So it has been based on evidence and gap map, which is supported by literature, as Dr. Amia pointed out, and as I earlier alluded in the presentation. So that it's not only by using what we think should be the connection, but what has been the evidence that exists on it, so that we are able to connect this evidence and with the pathways and the mechanisms that leads to the outcomes of interest, which are three: the nutritious diet, women's economic empowerment, and gender equality. Now on the research methodology, so the design, so what we did is just look at using the Prisma, as I earlier indicated, where we now sample through the body of evidence through a systematic search using different databases. Then from the databases, we are able to do our green literature search, which are all well documented in our protocols that has been established. Then based on that, we take the theory of change frameworks. Of course, the theory of change framework could be done by about three main ways, whether you use pictorial views in a table form or narration. Here we are using the pictorial view. And based on the pictorial view, we are able to connect the various linkages, that is the inputs to the outcomes, the outputs, outcomes, and then the impact. The impact is our long-term outcomes, where we are looking at the nutritious diet, women's empowerment. So that is the methodology that we followed. And this is quite a standard way that has been done previously, except that the previous works didn't, most of the time, is not based on the body of the literature or the evidence, but that is the key addition that we are making. Then, as I earlier also indicated in the presentation, as a team, we decided to divide ourselves into groups, and each group look at specific component of it. A group look at post-production, some look at production, and after that, we did our validation. Of course, we have also received external support in terms of validating some of the key pathways connecting the infrastructure impact to the outcomes. Yes. Now, on the last one that I was able to pick out was the indicators on the gender equality and women's empowerment, and how different were they. Of course, we rely on the pro-rear one, and the rear indicator, that's the Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index on those ones. And then we added onto that, because before the advent of the rear, there have been other studies, particularly those that use qualitative evaluation techniques, also have several indicators that are used. So we built on that. So it's not only we concentrated on the rear indicators, but we also added the various other indicators that exist in the body of literature or the evidence to support our work. Yes. So probably if I miss anything, Joe and Gloria and others, you can add on. Thank you very much.
Yes, so
Can Gloria come in to talk about the exclusion and inclusion, or Joe, you can talk about that?
Okay,
yes,
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gloria.
Okay, Joe, go on, please. Yeah, yes,
So
thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Dr. Mia. Thank you, Charles. So for the inclusion criteria, so if the study was done in a low-income country, in low and middle-income countries, in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and also it was done within the year 2000 to 2002 and was in English, then it is included. Otherwise, we exclude from the search. So those were the criteria we use in the inclusion and exclusion criteria.
I think just are there other exclusion
Thank
criteria?
you. Thank you very much. In addition to what Joseph has just said, good afternoon, everyone. We also considered the intervention and also the outcome of interest. These are key criteria we looked at. If a paper has used or studied any of the interventions of interest, like Dr. Okyere has already explained, distribution interventions and post-production, production and information or communication infrastructure. If it is linked to any of the outcome of interest, we include those papers. And then we also considered the study design. Though we did not use it to exclude papers, we checked which study designs were used because the type of evidence being generated is very important. Study designs are very important to give credible evidence. So we considered that in the coding, though we did not exclude papers on study designs, but we assessed which study designs were applied in the various studies that we considered for the evidence and gap map. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gloria, Joe, and Charles. I don't know if you have further comments. Any questions, further questions and comments at this point?
Anne-Sophie, please, did we answer all the questions? I might have missed some of them. I think we have addressed 3.
Yes.
We have addressed the inclusion, exclusion criteria, the protocol we used, and then there was a comment on the indicators, which Charles has explained.
Has addressed, yeah.
Yes.
There was one on methodology as well. Maybe
can you repeat that question?
The first one was, okay, the first question was, it seems that you conducted a systematic review of existing primary studies. You based your TOC development on a fairly large number of studies, 342. Could you please mention the protocols you followed in searching and selecting these studies? It would also be great if we could see some characteristics of the 342 studies. That was from me.
Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so we followed a guideline prescribed by Campbell collaboration. And Campbell collaboration requires that any protocol or EGM that is submitted to Campbell Review Journal, it meets the set criteria recommended for conducting a good EGM, a credible EGM. So we defined how our search criteria will be, and it follows it's similar to systematic review. We had to define our set terms, and then we also declared the data sources, the databases that we're going to search. So we defined.
There's a lot of background noise.
Yes, there's another background. It's not from my end here. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so we defined the set terms based on the population, intervention, and outcome we have expressed interest in studying, and also we identified databases that we were sure we're going to identify eligible papers. In our case, we used 3 databases. That is the academic databases. We complemented it with the Open Alex artificial learning or machine learning system or software in EpiReviewer to ensure that we have comprehensively searched for potential papers for the EGM. We also did a search from great literature sources like organizational or relevant organizational websites. So we had to define. I don't want to go into all that, how we defined or how our protocol was developed, but we worked with a standard guideline, and currently our protocol is being reviewed for publication. We've received reviewers' comments, and it's expected that we publish our protocol just like any systematic review. So we have done that, and we have ensured that our processes are systematic as much as possible. Yeah. If the one who asked the question has any further question or clarification, that would be helpful. But we also did, we screened the papers, the title and abstract. We had a priority screening that was also artificial learning software. It helped us to order the papers in most relevance ranking, and they help us to do a single screening. We followed it up with a double screening for the full test, 2 people screened, and if there was any discrepancy in decision as to include or exclude, we engage a third person to help to resolve any misjudgment or understanding whether to include or exclude a paper. So we did the data extraction, and then, yeah, so this were used for the map. In terms of characteristics, as we said, these papers came from sub-Saharan countries and South Asia. So most of the papers, yeah, we had 54 countries. Let me get some of the data here so I can mention them to you. 54 countries. A majority of the papers reported on production, specifically irrigation from Ethiopia, Kenya. So yes, and most of the papers were primary studies. We have few systematic reviews. Thank you very much. I think I'll end here. Thank you very much. So please contact us if you need more information. We've made the EGM also available on our website. Kindly visit it and send us more comments. Thank you very much. Anne-Sophie, please, I hand over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Anne-Sophie, hold a minute. Yes. And this TOC also will be on our website. It is not yet there, but we will be posting it on ICED website also. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amiel. I think there was a hand up from Tara. I think she had a question.
Oh yeah, I put in the chat, which you can ignore now if you want, but I'm sorry if I missed it because I did have to step away for just a moment. But I'm wondering from all of the involved researchers, given your thorough review of the evidence and your theory of change, do you think there are any particular remaining evidence gaps that would help you to refine or you think are needed? What are the existing evidence gaps that you identified that could help enhance this kind of work in the future, or that you think are needed to further validate the theory of change or to inform parts of the theory of change that maybe could be added? I leave it open-ended to you, but what do you see based on your thorough review as the gaps or needs for research moving forward?
Thank you, Tara, for the question. So I can give a quick response and then others can also come in. Yes, so while the theory of change just shows the connection between the various pathways, as you rightly pointed out, our review of the literature, as has also been shown in our previous document of the evidence and gap map, we have seen considerable limited evidence, particularly those that are related to the information infrastructure. So for instance, that is a major gap that needs to be filled in the literature. Of course, if you look at the production infrastructure, most of them were tailored towards irrigation. And there are other ones like on-farm energy were also really missing. And those even on irrigation were highly tailored towards the nutritious diet component, but not on the gender equality component as well. So even within subdomains, we see a lot of gaps that exist that future research will have to pick it on. And as I also pointed out, of course, Gloria has also highlighted that even if you go on our website, the evidence and gap map has been shown, and we have provided a narrative on it where people can actually see the body of evidence and then use it. So these are very useful tools that we have been able to develop, and we hope that all of us will take a look and then present comments or also use it in their subsequent activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. To add to what you said, evidence on production infrastructure, especially irrigation and nutritious diets, that specifically food availability at the farm level, had the highest aggregate evidence. And it's this is a potential area for evidence synthesis, specifically systematic reviews. So we need to consolidate the evidence that currently exists into systematic reviews to inform future policies. I think that would be great. And also gender. We realize that evidence on gender equality was quite scanty. And we know that women are actively involved or contribute to a great proportion of labor in agriculture, but little has been studied on how different types of infrastructure influence women economic empowerment and gender equality. So this is an area that we could study to understand how we can support women and gender issues or improve gender issues in agriculture using evidence. So these are some of the things we could consider going forward. Yeah, thank you very much. So I hand over to you, Anne-Sophie. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Tara. Okay, she says thank you. Thank you all, presenters for today, Charles, Joe, and Gloria. We appreciate your time and your insights on the topic of discussion today. If there's no further comments at this point, I'd just like to thank you all for participating and engaging. And like they have mentioned, our presenters today, you can go to the ICE website and have a look at the evidence gap map. It's there, and drop an email or give feedback to the team. Once again, thank you very much for your time today and your participation. It's been quite engaging. We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next session next month. We will send out the details for that. Thank you.